We're meeting number 143, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, fondly known everywhere as the Mighty Yogo. Before we start, colleagues, I just need feedback from the committee, please. We, of course, have Global Affairs here today. The motion stated only Ms. Nicholson. Global Affairs was asked to have Mr. Kusie, who's the lead ADM, responsible for the department, attend today, but because the motion only called for her, I will leave it up to the committee to decide whether that Mr. Kusie, should be allowed at the table or not. So I'll just do a quick show of hands, please. Okay. Yes, no?
I made the motion to have Ms. Nicholson appear, and I think I don't see. We've already had Mr.
Simply yes
Kusie.
or no. Sorry. Yes or no for Mr. Kusie to be.
No, I'm okay with just Ms. Nicholson joining us.
Okay. The ayes have it. Mr. Kusie, you're welcome to join us.
They have it with Julie. They've all said yes.
Sir?
Just a math question.
Very short comment. Thank you for that, first of all, to all the colleagues who supported us. Prior to the meeting, I informed you and the clerk that Minister will be appearing on November 7th. That was my mistake. She will actually be appearing on November 5th. So, Mr. Clark, you're 100% right. I made a mistake. It is November 5th that the Minister will be showing. So that was a mistake on my part. I just wanted to correct.
Wonderful. That's great news. I appreciate you following up on that.
Thank you.
So the 5th and the 7th then.
Point of order.
Mr. Barrett?
Yeah, so my understanding is that this committee passed a motion that no witnesses can be added without the committee having duly considered that in advance. There was quite a bit of consternation about that. This witness, Mr. Kusie, has appeared before the committee as a witness before, so he's being recalled today without it appearing on the meeting notice. We have Ms. Nicholson, who's been called specifically to answer questions. So. Mr. Kusie has not been requested to be here by the committee. So is it going to be the practice going forward that we can just summon people out of the gallery to ask them questions? And if so, are we going to do that today? Are we going to pull other people from the gallery? This is a very unusual practice. It's I don't think a good one, to be clear, and it needs to be understood that if this is sustained, that Mr. Kusie sits at the table, that unless questions are directly given to him, that he's not permitted to speak. So there's no questions that he can answer unless they're put directly to him. The committee didn't ask for him to be here.
I appreciate that. And on this point of order, we have in the past, in the 9 years I've been on this committee, we will ask for a department or person, other people will attend with them or in its stead. I'm fine ruling that to allow Mr. Kusie. We do have that rule. That was not the others on anyone else on the motion, but it was a request from Global Affairs and committee has approved it, so I'm good with it. So we'll continue.
So Mr. Kusie is not permitted to answer questions.
You do not have to ask him questions. If you're directing the question or anyone's directing the question at Ms. Nicholson, we would expect Ms. Nicholson to respond. If we ask questions of Mr. Kusie, I expect Mr. Kusie to respond and not Ms. Nicholson.
Okay, so he's just going to sit there then?
Fine then. We have a 5-minute opening statement from Ms. Nicholson. Please go ahead.
This is very strange.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, honourable members. I am pleased to be here today in support of the committee's important work to ensure accountability and full transparency of government operations, including those of Global Affairs Canada. I will speak today first to my role as Chief of Staff to the Associate Deputy Minister, and second to the context and content of 2 emails dated June 17th and July 25th of this year.
Turning to my role as Chief of Staff within the Associate's Office, I sometimes liken my job to that of an air traffic controller. I serve a coordination function, providing oversight of the Associate's schedule and overseeing the flow of information between the department's subject matter experts and the Associate's Office. My work supports senior officials, enabling them to do their jobs effectively. On occasion, I also serve a liaison function between the department and the Minister's Office to provide an initial overview or quick update on a file. The Minister's Office may then ask for a full briefing by the experts who manage the file on a daily basis. Here, I summarize the best information available at the time as provided by the file experts. C'est dans cette capacité de
It was in that liaison capacity that the June 17th and July 25th emails of interest were drafted, so I'll now turn to the context and intent of that correspondence.
14th, 2024, the Minister's Office requested information on the department's decision to sell Canada's official residence for the Consulate in New York. That request focused on the sale of the property originally purchased in 1961 and sought confirmation that all due policies and procedures had been followed. After gathering information from the subject experts, I provided an initial overview response on June 17th. The intent of that email was to clarify and explain why the department was selling the official residence, communicate that all proper policies had been adhered to, including confirmation that the head of mission was aware of the process as per standard departmental practice. The email summarized the information provided by the subject leads at the time of the request. Une phrase dans
One sentence in the summary of this full-page response focused on the sale of the official residence did not clearly differentiate between the role of the mission employees and the role of the head of mission, the Consul General.
Consul General, mes excuses. In that sentence, I intended to convey that the mission staff had been instrumental in supporting this headquarters-led process throughout the past 10 years, and that the Consul General was engaged and aware that a process was underway. In that same sentence, again drafted in the context of responding to the questions about the sale of the current residence, the word green light was intended to communicate that the Consul General was aware of and prepared to accommodate the department's plan to proceed with identifying a replacement property. The email did not state that the Consul General was involved in the decision-making process, exercised influence, or signed for any transactions related to the process. In hindsight, more precise language could have been used to avoid any misunderstanding. That clarification was provided on July 25th. As the detailed email on July 25th clearly shows, the consul was not part of the approval for this overall process, the selection of a replacement property, or of the property purchase. The consul was only shown the property selected to replace the official residence after the bid to purchase was already accepted. In conclusion, the detailed study and examination of records related to this file demonstrated that all correct policies and procedures were followed throughout this process, with the end result being to relocate the residence to a smaller, more cost-effective property. Je suis prête à répondre.
I look forward to clarifying any remaining questions that the committee may have on this correspondence to ensure full
We're 3 minutes into the committee and you've already lied twice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll start our opening round with Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes,
Mr.
please.
Barrett, right away. Let's go.
Ms. Nicholson, you understand that in your testimony today that it's expected that though you haven't sworn an oath that your answers will be fulsome and truthful?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do.
You sent an email to Minister Jolie's Chief of Staff on June 17th, and you said both CNGNY, HOM. Can you just give those acronyms for us quickly?
Certainly, CNGNY refers to how we refer to the consulate.
And HOM is?
The head of mission.
Right. Both CN, GNY, HOM, and staff have been instrumental throughout this process, with the HOM providing the green light for the selection of the new residence. Did you personally have knowledge of Mr. Clark's personal involvement, or was that relayed to you? And if someone related to you, who was that?
Mr. Chair, as I stated in my opening remarks, my role is to summarize the information that is provided to me at the best available information at that time.
Okay, who provided the information to you?
In gathering the information to convey and respond to the Minister's office, I engaged with the property branch.
Okay, who in the property branch?
Mr. Chair, my interaction was with Robin Dubois, the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Property Branch.
And that's the only person?
Mr. Chair, I also engaged with members of his team, including the Director General for Policy and Planning of the Property Branch.
And that is?
That person is Frank. And apologies to Frank, I won't be able to say his last name correctly, Huzang Ngabe.
On July 24th, this committee passed a sweeping accountability motion on this $9 million condo purchase for a Liberal insider during a cost of living crisis here in Canada. And then the following day, you issued a bogus correction to your June 17th email. And in that correction, you say that neither the head of mission was, and you say PRNMY nor CNGNY was part of the selection or approval process for the overall process for the property purchase. And so just so we're clear, you wrote this email that I'm referring to from July 25th, 2024, and you wrote the email that I previously referenced on June 17th, 2024. Those, I accurately quoted you in both?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I drafted those emails.
Okay. So in the first email, ma'am, you say both CNGNY, HOM, and staff have been instrumental throughout the process, with the HOM providing the green light for the selection of the new residents. That's not a typo. It's not a comma instead of a semicolon. That's very deliberate language. You're the head of mission providing the green light. Who instructed you to issue the correction that you issued on the 25th, the day after the motion was passed by the committee?
Mr. Chair, no one instructed me to make a correction.
Okay, so you'll have to elaborate, ma'am. The timeline is beyond curious. June 17th, you explicitly say the head of mission greenlit the project. July 24th, the committee issues the invitation for Mr. Clark to appear, and the next day, you suddenly your mind is cast back more than a month to issue a correction to the email that you sent, just of your own volition.
Mr. Chair, as I said in my opening remarks, the term green light, well, first I think it's important to remember the context in which the first email was drafted.
With all due respect, ma'am, the question was about the genesis of the so-called correction email that you sent. Did you do this entirely of your own undertaking without discussion, consultation, or instruction with anyone?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I work with the best available information provided at the time. After issuing the initial June 15th or 17th email that was, as I mentioned, an initial overview, the Office of the Associate requested the leads to go through and pull together a more detailed chronology of events. And once that information was available, I relayed that information to the Minister's office. No one asked me to correct anything. I relayed the best available information that was presented to me at the time.
Who told you that Mr. Clark was not involved?
Mr. Chair, the records from the property branch demonstrated that the Consul General was aware of the process, but not involved or in a decision-making role.
Yeah, I've got to tell you that's quite the reversal. You effectively swallowed yourself whole in this correction that you issued within a day of this committee having Mr. Clark ordering him to appear. And I'm just going to quote you back to yourself. The head of mission providing the green light for the selection of the new residents. that was based on the best available information that was provided to you at the time. But the information that you received a month later, a day after this committee passed the motion, is a complete reversal of that. Will you table for this committee all correspondence, written, electronic, or otherwise, related to this issue, and specifically to the July 25th subject matter that you write on?
Mr. Chair, of course, I'm happy to provide
Thank you very
any
much.
material that would be useful.
Thank you. And our committee has passed a motion. We require any requested documents within 3 weeks, 3 calendar weeks, not business weeks. We will now go to Mr. Jouari for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Nicholson, for joining us and clarifying. So I'd like to get an understanding of 2 things. Number one, the general role that you play and the process that you go through as far as providing update with the lens as it relates to the residents. And what I've jotted down is there seems to be some conversation on June 14th, which led to June 17 update. A motion was passed in July 24th for a study, and on July 25th, you felt that you needed to make some clarification. That's the chronologic that I have. But let's start with the role that you play within the department. What role do you play?
Certainly, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I serve as the Chief of Staff to the Associate Deputy Minister. My role is largely to ensure that she, in her role, has the information that she needs to really carry about her key business. And specifically with respect to this question today, my role was really that of a liaison function, just to move information between the experts, the property branch, and the minister's office.
So how often do you meet with the assistant deputy minister?
With the associate deputy minister?
Yeah.
So I work with the associate on a daily basis.
Okay, so do you guys have a weekly, or do you talk about topics on an everyday basis?
We spend a good deal of our time together and have set meetings, touch bases in the morning to go over key files for the week.
Okay, so was this one of the key files that you were providing update on June 14th?
No, Mr. Chair. On June 14th, the question came to our office from the minister's office.
Okay, so on June 14th, a question came from the minister's office making inquiry about this. Was that a regular part of inquiry from the minister's office coming to your department across many different things, and that happened to be one of them as well?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The role of the deputy minister's office is to ensure, first and foremost, that the running of the department is being handled, but also to ensure that the minister's office has the most up-to-date information on whatever might be of direct relevance to their work.
Okay, it looks like a complex structure the way you kind of depicted it by going across. Can you talk about the organization that exists in GAC, and how does your department fits into it?
Certainly, the department is organized under 4 deputy ministers, a deputy minister of foreign affairs, a deputy minister of international trade, and a deputy minister of international development. The associate deputy minister primarily supports that of the deputy minister of foreign affairs. Under each of the 4 deputies, they each have clear branches of responsibility, is how we refer to them, and that are components of the department that work on different aspects.
So this was under the Foreign Affairs Ministry, correct? So we had international development, and we had
MP Jolie.
The role that I serve, if it's helpful, is under the Associate Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, and that role largely looks at the corporate matters, and it is in that capacity that a question of property would come to our office.
Okay, so a question of property came as part of a regular process, and you provided an update on June 17th, correct? And
Yes.
that update, you're saying you act as a liaison and you brought a source of information. You highlighted whom you reached out to get the information. And on July 25th, almost a month and so after, you felt that there was a need for an update. In your response to my colleague, MP Barrett, you talked about Office of Associate made a request and you prepared. What is the Office of Associate?
So and apologies for any confusion there. The official title of the person that I serve, her role is the Associate Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs. So when I say the Office of the Associate, I'm referring to our office, and it's just to clarify, if helpful. While the timing may be such that an email was officially hit send on July 25th, that process of gathering that information had been in the works for some time. The associate, after June 17th, had requested of the leads to compile a full summary and chronology of events with respect to this process. This multi-year process was quite complex because it took place over the span of 10 years, which was 8 years prior to the current head of missions arrival.
So it's more a coincidence, as you're stating it, that on July 25th, that email came up. That email started. The work on that email started way back, which is in June 17th. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Nicholson, I'll give you a
This is quiet.
moment
Let me see
to
if I can
put
turn
your
this up.
earpiece on.
I don't think that my headpiece is working correctly, and juste pour être sûr que je peux comprendre.
Just to be sure that I can understand all of the questions in French, it would be helpful to have someone help me.
We'll just freeze the clock for 15 seconds.
I think we have the same issue with those.
I think it's more you're the issue.
Sorry?
I think
I know.
I should turn.
Stalling tactic. Why didn't she say this before? Now all of a sudden she needs to fix her earpiece.
So we are in Ottawa on this beautiful day. It was foggy this morning.
Merci.
Thank you very much. So my colleagues have already talked about this, and I'm trying to fully understand the statement from the email on June 17th versus July 25th. When you wrote, the head of mission and staff from the mission played an instrumental role throughout the process, what does that mean to you? That they were instrumental, what does that mean as a concrete action?
Je vais.
I will answer in English just to be certain that I'm clear.
Sorry, but this still wasn't working very well, so I really didn't hear most of the question, with apologies.
We'll suspend for 30 seconds.
Bullcrap. She's not having tech issues. Everybody, the whole other committee, nobody else is having an earpiece issue. She's the only one who's having an earpiece issue. They literally have tech set up everything like half an hour before the committee starts, goes around and checks everybody's earpieces, everybody's mics, everything's working properly, and then they start the committee. Find this really hard to believe. I find this really hard to believe.
Donc, je vais reposer.
So I will ask my question again. In the email from
She's
June
deaf in that ear.
2024, it was written that the head of mission
Oh,
and
that's funny.
staff from the mission played an instrumental role throughout the process, and that the head of mission approved the selection of the new residents.
Okay, now everything's just quiet.
First question. To you, what is it to play an instrumental role concretely in terms of
Holy
actions?
crap, this is
What
really
does that
quiet. I
mean?
can't even turn this up anymore.
And when you wrote that the head of mission approved the selection of the new residents, greenlit, is that approval a real approval, or is it just an administrative requirement without it really being him who makes the final decision? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. With respect to instrumental, what was meant to be communicated, and as far as the role of the mission staff, what was communicated to me is the mission staff, for example, had been instrumental in assisting with engaging a broker or realtor on the ground, had accompanied the property team to the 21 different site visits, and had been involved in the process throughout the over, as I said, 10 years. In order to provide a more fulsome response to that question, I would need to refer you to my colleague, Stéphane Cousineau, who is more familiar with the processes. But what was communicated to me was that the mission staff had been involved in supporting the staff.
Merci.
Thank you. I'll talk about mission staff again, but the email also refers to the head of mission. So what are the concrete actions that the head of mission took and that show that he played an instrumental role?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, as I stated in my opening remarks, that email should have been drafted more clearly. It should have said and read that the head of mission was aware of the process, and the staff were instrumental. And apologies for the confusion that made. Again, this was a transitory email that was meant as a quick update, a placeholder to the chief of staff in initial response to his question that was focused primarily on understanding the rationale and the business case for the department's decision to sell.
Merci. La seconde.
Thank you. Second question was the head of mission greenlit the selection of the new residents. Did he actually approve it or greenlight it, or was it just an administrative obligation? And if he didn't greenlight it, what would the consequences have been?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the term green light was meant as a thumbs up. It was just intended to communicate that the Consul General was aware of and prepared to deal with the hassle of moving partway through his assignment, and that he had not raised any concerns with the department's decision to move forward with the selection of the sale. Again, could have been crafted better. At the time, this email was focused primarily on addressing questions about the sale.
Et s'il ne l'avait pas approuvé?
Such a liar.
And what would have happened if he hadn't greenlit it? What would the consequences have been?
The department, in order to answer that question, I would need to refer to my colleague, Stéphane Cousineau. My limited understanding is that the head of mission is not in a decision-making capacity at any mission.
Parlant de vos notes d'allocution.
Speaking of your opening remarks, usually we ask to receive them in both official languages 48 hours before the meeting. Would it be possible for you to submit them, please, as soon as possible so that we can have them in front of us?
Certainly. My apologies, Mr. Chair. My understanding was that had been done by the department. I believe that I have remarks on hand that I'd be happy to share if that would be helpful.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. We'll ensure the clerk sends them out. Mr. Backrack, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Boy, this is a frustrating bit of testimony and somewhat unbelievable, to be honest. Ms. Nicholson, the things that you're saying are tough to believe because you strike me as someone who is very precise and very professional in your conduct. And what you're claiming is that you accidentally mischaracterized something that seems to be characterized in a very specific way.
Yeah.
Does not the term gave the green light, isn't that synonymous with approving something? you've characterized it as okay and willing to go along with a process. But if I say that someone gave me the green light, to me that means that someone approved something. Is that not the most common definition of that phrase?
Mr. Chair, I'm unable to speak to common definitions. I can only speak to my intent and how I intended and what I was intending to convey. And as I said in my opening remarks, that sentence, again, was drafted in the context focused on the sale of the current residence and was intended to communicate that the Consul General was aware of and prepared to accommodate the department's plan to proceed with identifying a replacement property. It was no way meant, and as I stated in my opening remarks, I did not say that the Consul General was involved in any of the decision-making process. I did not say that he exercised influence or signed for any transactions, and there have been no records found that indicate anything to the contrary. Again, the email drafted on June 17th was an initial email, a quick update, a transaction based on the best available information that we had at the time. As I said, in hindsight, the language could have been drafted more precisely, but again, the context for that email was drafted specifically focused on responding to questions from the minister's office about the sale. Why was the department taking a decision to sell a property it had purchased in 1961? And our intent and our area of concern and focus was principally and totally focused on communicating the department's business case and rationale for that decision to sell.
Ms. Clark, there's two possible explanations for what happened. One is the explanation you've provided, which is that you accidentally mischaracterized what occurred and used language that you shouldn't have used because it didn't accurately describe what happened. The other explanation is that actually Mr. Clark was involved in the process, did give the green light, tried his best to avoid having any documentation of that, and yet despite trying to avoid documentation, ended up with this email on June 17th, which was then corrected. Like, for a member of the public who's watching this testimony and trying to decide which of those explanations is the most likely, like, you have to forgive people who think that the most likely explanation is the simplest one, which is that actually the language you used in the June 17th email, giving the green light, have been instrumental, was an accurate reflection of his role in the process. Like, how do you explain to reasonable people that are watching this testimony and thinking, it seems like maybe something occurred that shouldn't have occurred?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, a mistake was made. The department proactively provided that clarification to the committee, anticipating that there could be concern, fully cognizant of how language taken out of context could be misinterpreted. And that's why I'm here today to convey and to clarify the context within which that first email was drafted, to clearly state that there was no request by anyone to ask me to make a correction. What the information that was provided on July 25th was pulled together over a process of the property team going through and clearly putting a more detailed explanation together. And that explanation was provided to the minister's office on July 25th.
I asked Mr. Clark at his previous appearance how he was notified that the process was occurring and whether he could provide documentation of that notification. And he said there was no documentation. It was all done verbally. Is that convenient? Is that appropriate, given the context, given the need to document, notification of significant officials like Mr. Clark? Like, it seems unusual that something like notifying the Consul General that a process was taking place wouldn't be documented in some way through an email or a memo or something like that. It seems to kind of play into this pattern that we're seeing, which is that he actually had a more involved role than he said he had, and just none of it was supposed to be documented, because if he was that involved, it wouldn't have been following the department's procedures. Why wasn't it documented when he was notified of the process?
Mr. Chair, unfortunately, I'm unable to speak to whatever transactions or communications would have taken place on the ground. For that, I would need to refer the committee to my colleagues at work at our mission in New York.
Mr. Chair, do I have more time? Okay. I'm not sure how much further we can take this testimony other than just to express my total incredulity at the fact that the language used in these professional communications is so specific and seems obvious to many members of the committee that the language was meant to convey Mr. Clark's role and then was retracted. Maybe my last question will be this. If, hypothetically, Mr. Clark had been involved and had given the green light, which constitutes approval of the process, if that had all occurred, as articulated in your June 17th email, would that have been inappropriate?
I'm afraid there's not enough time for a response, but perhaps on your next round or perhaps in writing. We'll now go to our second round. We'll start with Mrs. Kusie, please.
Oh, Ms. Kusie, she's good.
Ms. Nicholson, the Treasury Board just recently increased the approval threshold from $4 million to $10 million, as I'm sure you're aware, in 2022. How many real estate purchases did the Minister of Foreign Affairs approve on an annual basis, both before and after this significant change, please?
Mr. Chair, with apologies, that would be outside of my scope and area of expertise. I would be happy to refer the question to my colleague, Stéphane Cousineau.
That's not necessary at this time. Perhaps if Monsieur Cousineau could provide this information to the committee and table it, that would be truly appreciated. Thank you. Minister Joly was appointed as the Minister of Foreign Affairs in late 2021, and it seems shortly after this, the threshold was then increased by $6 million. And now the minister suddenly is not required to approve of these costly real estate purchases. And yet the following year, Tom Clark is appointed as Consul General of New York, and immediately after this, work is underway to provide him with a new luxury apartment on Billionaires Row. Does this timing not seem a little suspect to you and seem to the point that things perfectly lined up to allow Mr. Clark to have this new luxury apartment?
Mr. Chair, I can really only speak today to my role in this process, which is limited to these two emails that have been presented to the committee. What I can say from my understanding is that this process, I believe, spanned over 10 years, was initiated in 2014, which was 8 years prior to the current head of missions arrival in New York.
According to an ATIP the National Post received, it states that you emailed an executive in the department that the branch in charge of the purchase failed to mention the apartment was on Billionaires Row. I believe this is Monsieur Cousineau's branch. Why did you personally think that it was important for the minister to know that this was located on Billionaires Row? Why did that stand out to you to mention to her?
Mr. Chair, my summary in that email to the Deputy Minister who was acting for the Associate over that weekend was very much to convey the background and all information to ensure that he had the most detailed information to make decisions on the file. What I intended in drafting that email was simply a summary of events that had taken place to that date.
Right. In your introduction, Ms. Nicholson, you indicated that you prioritize issues for the minister. You provide a summary of issues to the minister. What is the title and name of your counterpart with the minister, please?
If I understand correctly, Mr. Chair, if the honourable member is asking for the name of the Chief of Staff in the minister's office?
That's correct, yes. Who do you have these daily conversations with, please?
Oh, with apologies, that was I was speaking to the role of the Associate Deputy Minister. My daily conversations are with the Associate Deputy Minister, who is my boss.
Okay, pardon me, but your counterpart that you have these or bring up points of interest to the minister, who do these occur with?
If I understand correctly, the question, Mr. Chair, in conveying information to the minister's office, that largely goes from our floor to our liaison unit.
I'm going to go to the process then, Ms. Nicholson. What criteria do you personally use to bring something forward to the minister? You said you provide, you prioritize issues and you provide summaries. What information, what flags you personally that something has to be brought to the attention of the minister?
Mr. Chair, the majority of the work that I do in summarizing or prioritizing are areas that the leads within the department, the branches, bring forward to my associate and identify as priorities within the department, or that might be of interest or of need to update in the minister's office. I have never personally identified a priority for the minister.
Okay. How does the minister then flag decisions that are of importance to her?
Mr. Chair, the minister, and again, my involvement with this is quite limited, my direct involvement, but my understanding of the process is that the minister conveys to her staff what her priorities are, and those come down to our department via the, we call them a liaison unit that works between the minister's office and the deputy's office.
Did the minister's office ask you to send the July 25th correction?
The minister's office, Mr. Chair, did not ask me to send any correction ever.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Mr. Baines, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. Madam Nicholson, can you please share with us, as you work closely with experts involved in the sale of residence, can you share your perspective on how the department adhered to policies, ensured that there was transparency throughout the process? And did you review the records that your office requested? Did they show any interference in this purchase by Mr. Clark?
Mr. Chair, the review of any documentation and the processes and procedures is done by my colleagues, the experts on this matter, who have years of expertise on property branch. I don't personally have the expertise to review their documentation.
Do you know that have they completed their review?
Mr. Chair, I would need to refer to my colleagues for that. I wouldn't want to misspeak. That's outside of my area and scope.
And is there a review happening right now?
Mr. Chair, the Office of the Associate requested, as I stated earlier, and happy to clarify, that following the initial summary that was provided to the Minister's office, that a thorough review be conducted of all of the processes and procedures, including the chronology, and that was what was presented to our office, and that is what I presented on July 25th as an update to the Minister's office.
And that's activated now, that's in action.
Mr. Chair, again, to give you a more fulsome and...
Just to confirm, yes or no, if that's in action.
Mr. Chair, I honestly don't know if it's completed or not. It was asked and the information was presented to me on July 25th, and that's the extent of my knowledge.
Maybe not concluded, but has it been activated? Do you know if it started?
Certainly, Mr. Chair, the outcome of that information was conveyed in the email that I conveyed and provided to the Minister's office on July 25th of this year.
Okay, what mechanisms are in place to avoid political interference and purchase of any real property by Global Affairs Canada?
Mr. Chair, I certainly know that there are processes and policies in place, but unfortunately that's outside of my scope. I would be happy to refer you to my colleague, Mr. Kusie, who could better answer that question for you.
Sure.
It's going to be a pleasure for me to clarify this point. In response to the question that I got, which is how do we actually ensure that the decision-making is actually managed by internally the real property expertise and with no influence, is we actually have a very, very clear governance which involve all the real property expert at the table and the different actually stakeholders. There's ongoing interaction with the mission, which is understandable because we need to make sure that the requirements are very clear. As part of that process, absolutely, we always make aware the mission, but there's no involvement in the selection or any purchase. They're only there to ensure that as we apply the process and the plan, that the limitation is there for any impact on their operation, which is why we always check with the mission to make sure that we can proceed with our plan because they need to be continuing into their operation. So once again, this process was actually complying with all policies, all process, the Chapter 5 of our real property framework that we have in place, and was well executed. And we still believe that it's a great investment for the Canadian taxpayer. Thank you.
Okay, and like what price threshold, like if there's any, do real property purchases require the authority of the Minister of Foreign Affairs?
Mr. Chair, I can take that. Yeah, Mr. Chair,
Sure,
I can take
sure.
that question.
Whoever has the information, please answer.
All good. Mr. Chair, I'll be pleased to actually take that question and authority. The minister is actually there to the delegation of authority that we obtained from Treasury Board. In this case, the authority to purchase like official resident was $10 million, and we followed that delegation authority that was provided to the minister and the departmental authority.
Mr. Cousineau, maybe the earlier questions that Ms. Nicholson didn't have the information for. Do you know if a review has been activated on this?
We only have time for a yes or no.
I will say yes, and the information has been provided already. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Pardon. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Nicholson, I'm sorry for the interpreters. Ms. Nicholson, I've listened to you, and I have the impression, I've experienced it before in another life, I have the impression that I'm talking to someone who's covering for someone else. Who's covering someone else's mistake, a decision by another person, because it's what needs to be done. In all sincerity, I hope it's not the case. If it is the case, I find it sincerely unfortunate.
Yeah, she's
But
covering
I need to
for
ask you the
Trudeau.
question. Are you covering for someone?
Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the honourable member's concern. This really is a simple matter of a misword or a different choice of a word. If we could go back in time, we would write the email differently, make it more clear. But the information that I've provided to you and all of the testimony that I've given to you is accurate.
Okay. The threshold for the purchase of an official residence was increased in 2019. It's now at $10 million, if I recall correctly. In the past, residences were built, for example, in Peru, it cost $16 million for a chancellery over 10 years ago. And there just needed to be an authorization. Is it Global Affairs that requested to Treasury Board that the threshold be increased so there no longer needed to be a request?
Mr. Chair, I have a very cursory knowledge of our authorities and would need to refer that question to our Chief Financial Officer or perhaps to someone. I'm not sure that Stefan would actually know that question either. So we would need to come back to you to give you a fulsome response.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bachrach, please.
Ms. Nicholson, have you ever met Mr. Clark?
Mr. Chair, I have never met Mr. Clark.
How did you know that green light was a mischaracterization of Mr. Clark's role?
Mr. Chair, as I stated in my opening remarks, after providing the initial summary that was intended as a very initial overview to the Minister's office on June 17th, we asked our colleagues in the property branch to provide a more fulsome explanation or chronology of events. And in that chronology of events, it was very clear that the head of mission had, well, very much aware that a process was going on and underway that predated his arrival, was in no way influential. And when I saw that information and realized how things could be interpreted from my initial email, I took the liberty of ensuring that that both the department and the minister's office had the best available information at the time.
And what prompted the request for a more fulsome explanation of events?
Mr. Chair, as evidenced by your article in the National Post, our office was not aware of this transaction, and so our office, while we had the initial conversations with Property Branch to gather the initial information provided in June 17th, there was certainly an acknowledgement that this transaction there was interest within the Associate's office of having a more fulsome understanding of that transaction, and as such, the request came from our office to pull together a detailed chronology so that, because Mr. Chair, it's also quite complex. It was spanning over 10 years. It involved numerous decision points, and so for our office to have a clear understanding of what exactly had happened from start to finish, we requested to have that information put forward to us, and once we had it ready, we relayed that to the minister's office. It just happened to be on July 25th.
I looked up the definition of the term green light, and the most common North American definition is to give permission to go ahead with. Now, if Mr. Clark had given permission to go ahead with the purchase, would that have been inappropriate?
Mr. Chair, I would need to relay that question to that. I would be giving you my notional understanding, which would be probably inaccurate. So I would refer the question to my colleague, Stéphane Cousineau, if that would be acceptable.
There's only time for a very brief answer, please.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify the reality of what the Consulate was approving, which is essentially ensuring that his operation was not impacting, and we wanted to make sure that the plan was fine for his operation, no impact, and he was actually approving the process of proceeding, not the purchase of the actual new residence. Mr. Clark was not.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Mrs. Block, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Nicholson, I join my colleagues in expressing a deep skepticism in regards to the explanation that you have provided this committee today. I want to go back to a response you gave in regards to a question that was asked today. In response to the question about who asked for the update email sent on July 25th, you stated that it was the Office of the Associate that requested it. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, to the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
Okay, and are you the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Associate? Is that the office you are referring to?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So you're telling us that your own office requested you for the update. Is that correct?
No, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for any confusion. It was our office requesting of the leads, my colleagues in the property branch, that they provide the chronology.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a lot of confusion being created here today. In fact, I want to go back to the email that you sent on July 25th, and in that email you state that the reason for this update email was because of a conversation between Minister Jolie's Chief of Staff, Peter Wilkinson, and the Chief of Staff of the Deputy Minister, Carolina Guay. And I'm going to quote what you wrote at the top of your email. Peter, following your conversation with Carolina, and further to my email of June 17th below, I am writing to provide additional information on the purchase of a new official residence for the Consulate in New York. I think we may have found the subject expert that you have referenced in your testimony earlier in this meeting in regards to who advised you on what should be in the updated email, and that would appear to be Mr. Wilkinson. in conversation with Carolina Guay. So, and I hope I'm saying her last name right. So I guess I'm going to give you one more opportunity to tell this committee, did anyone in the minister's office, anyone at any level in the minister's office, directly or indirectly ask you to provide an update and to include this information in it?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening statement, the email that I provided on June 17th was an initial email to the minister's office.
That's not what I asked. I asked, did anyone in the minister's office ask you directly or indirectly to provide the information that you included in this summary?
Mr. Chair, unequivocally, no. There was no instruction on what to include. We were providing information to the minister's office. The minister's office had asked for what was the rationale and the business case for the sale of the original property purchased in 1961 and asked if the head of mission was aware.
Okay. I do have the email in front of me. When did the conversation between Peter Wilkinson and Carolina Guay take place?
Mr. Chair, with apologies, I don't have that information top of mind. I would need to go back and consult with the individuals in question, as I wasn't in that conversation.
But it certainly would have happened sometime between the June 17th and the email that you sent. And I'm going to assume that it probably took place much closer to the July 25th date than it did to the June 17th date. I want to ask you, Ms. Nicholson, if you will table all communications, emails, written documents, or phone calls between yourself and any member of the Real Property Branch of Global Affairs Canada, Peter Wilkinson, Carolina Guay, and anyone working at the Consulate in New York City from June 1st, 2024 to October 3rd, 2024.
Mr. Chair, if that's within the purview of the committee, I'm more than happy to provide whatever the committee needs to do its work.
And I can assure you it absolutely is within the purview of a standing committee to ask a witness to do that. Thank you.
Great.
She's like, if I have to.
Mr. Sousa, please.
I don't really want
Thank
to.
you for appearing before us, and thank you for your composure. I know this is not always an easy task, and you're doing a phenomenal job, and you know you are under oath. Madam Nicholson, did you make the decision to buy this property?
Mr. Chair, I did not make the decision to buy this property.
In the correspondence that you wrote, did that indicate that you that someone had agreed to purchase the property? Or was that, like, is that a correction, or are you trying to clarify what has taken place?
Mr. Chair, if I'm not totally sure I understand the question. Are you talking about
in your subsequent email? I've heard the term that you've been correcting the record. Are you correcting the record? Or are you clarifying what took place?
Mr. Chair, that is in fact a better use of words. The July 25th email was, as evidenced by the length of the email, far more thorough, far more comprehensive in its coverage, and was based on the information available at the time. As I said earlier in my opening remarks, in my role, I provide the best available information provided to me at the time of the request.
Is it appropriate for anyone from government that's proceeding to make a major transaction of this nature on behalf of Canadians, by saving Canadians money, no less, in this transaction to the tune of $7 million, is it appropriate to then advise or consult with the head of that particular residence who's going to then be impacted by the change? Are you requesting or did you advise for purposes of acknowledging a sale, or was it acknowledging the process by which that person would be impacted, or that department?
Mr. Chair, my colleague would be better placed to fully answer that question. I can speak to what I intended to convey as a non-expert on this matter in the email that I drafted. And as I stated in my earlier remarks, my intent in utilizing the term green light was simply to demonstrate to the minister's office that the head of mission was aware that a process was underway that would require him to move partway through his assignment and would impact him. In order to give you a more fulsome answer to your question, I would need to refer you to my colleague, Mr. Cousineau.
Mr. Cousineau, I think you've already responded to that effect, but by all means, reaffirm if you may.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. No, absolutely. The reason why we make the consul and the head of mission aware is not only is it impacting him personally when we move, but it's impacting the whole operation of the mission, which is making even more important to keeping aware of the actual process that we're putting in place. But once again, I'm going to reiterate, there is no involvement from the head of mission in terms of the selection or the purchase of any.
And the purchase creates a net benefit to the taxpayer?
Absolutely. I could provide you the breakdown. The business case is very clear. We're actually selling, overall picture here, selling a current OR at $13 million. We're purchasing one at $9 million. We're also adding what we're going to be doing in cost saving from a renovation perspective. We're saving an annual ongoing cost of $115,000, which leads to that net present value of roughly up to $7.4 million.
So one pager on that?
We could.
If that could possibly. And now my next question is in regards to the head, to the Consul General himself. How long has this process been in play? How long have we been looking at relocating the residents?
Mr. Chair, I can take that response as well. As explained in history, we were actually looking into this file for probably the last 10 years. There was actually a report that came out on the 17th on the situation of the actual OR. So I would say it started in 2017, where there were consideration for either renovation or replacing the resident. With the COVID, the increase in terms of like price of the real property market in Manhattan, there was a very detailed analysis through the governance and tools and process that we have that indicated very clearly that it was the best to actually replace with a new.
Who made the decision to buy the property?
Mr. Chair, the decision was done according to departmental authority by our DG expert of real property.
Did the Minister of Foreign Affairs make a decision to buy the property?
Mr. Chair, there was no political influence, and no, the minister was not involved.
Did the Consul General make a decision to buy the property?
Mr. Chair, no, the Consul General was not involved in the selection and the purchase of the OR.
So the process was followed. Clarification was provided to ensure that people impacted would be aware and acknowledge the existence of this transaction. The transaction, which ultimately benefits Canadians to the tune of $7 million, because the net value appreciation of that is in the favor of the taxpayers, and the location is in keeping with other consul generals. In fact, it's one of the less affluent residents. Is that correct, Mr. Cousineau?
Mr. Chair, absolutely
correct.
correct.
Answer is all we have time for.
Yes.
Thanks. Mr. Barrett.
You said you received information from subject matter experts. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So you insert the information from the subject matter experts. You are not the subject matter expert. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
So what do you do?
That means, respectfully, that on the $9 million condo, you are not the expert.
That would be accurate, Mr. Chair.
So you received information from the experts before you sent this email on June the 17th. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, in compiling the information for the June 17th email,
it came from the experts.
That came from our property branch, yes.
So you just testified that you issued a correction to your email, and so the story that you've told today doesn't add up, just like the two emails that you've sent that don't add up. You're saying two contradictory things. That you only receive, that you only report the info that you receive, but on July 25th, you arrived at a conclusion on your own, absent the other information. So if the subject matter experts told you in June that, to use your words, that the head of mission providing the green light for the selection of the new residents, if that's what the experts told you, if you're just air traffic control and you're just landing the information in the document, well, where did the new information come from? This is what doesn't make sense. Which subject matter expert told you on July 25th, the day after a standing committee of the House of Commons launched an investigation into this $9 million condo, which expert told you that Mr. Clark didn't have anything to do with it? Their name.
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the experts have already been stated. Mr. Robin Dubois, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister for Property, and his team. And just to clarify that the request for the chronology and the information that was provided in that quite fulsome email was requested. That request had been made.
Yeah, when? On what date? On what date was the request made for the chronology from the minister's office?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, following the initial information that was provided to the minister's office on June 17th, the Office of the Associate engaged with my colleagues in Property Branch and asked them to pull together the more fulsome explanation.
Ma'am, what date did you get the request?
Mr. Chair, I would have to go back. I don't have a date off the top of my head.
Okay, we're going to need you to table it because it just seems. And do you agree to table that with the committee?
Of course.
Okay, so it seems incredible. Like, what a coincidence that you get the information from the experts and then you circulate that in the department, and a correction is issued only after just a happenstance conversation with the minister's office. And suddenly the head of mission is no longer giving the green light. Like that simply does not add up. It's absolutely not believable. And in the absence of proof, of proof of what you're saying, it appears that you're misleading us today. Because we have your own words. We have your own words making the assertion that the green light was given by the head of mission, by Tom Clark, to buy a $9 million condo. After the Treasury Board changed the rules to allow for purchases of less than $10 million without cabinet approval. It's like this perfect puzzle was put together, and the only interruption was a standing committee started an investigation, and suddenly a correction needs to be made. Does that sound believable to you? Does this presentation of facts sound believable to you? What you say on June 17th is one thing, and then of your own volition, without any new information, at the end of July, you say the complete opposite. You assert the complete opposite without evidence that what you're asserting is true.
It would be inaccurate to say that there was no new information presented. As I have said from the outset, the email provided on June 17th was very much an initial overview, not intended to capture everything and focus specifically on the sale.
From an overview perspective, you said Tom Clark gave the green light, and you only changed your story after an investigation was launched. That's the bottom line.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Mrs. Atwin now, please.
Miss
Thank you very
Atwin
much,
sucks.
Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for being here with us, Ms. Nicholson. And if you'd
Go
like
back
to
to the Green Party, honey.
clarify as well, so did you assert, was it a complete opposite? Was it the opposite of what you were saying in the second, or was it a clarification?
Mr. Chair, and thank you. As said, the information provided on July 25th was very much a more fulsome business case, a more fulsome explanation that was put together by the leads to provide a detailed chronology. There was no as stated, and appreciate being here to clarify the words that I drafted, because of course, taken out of context, any snapshot moment in time can be misconstrued to be viewed as something else. I am here today to correct, as the author of the statement, what was intended, and what I intended in drafting that statement was simply to convey that the head of mission was aware, had not raised any concerns or objections with the department department's plan to proceed with the purchase. And there was no, there was certainly additional information in response to the member's previous question that was brought to our office and was gathered by the property leads between June 17th and July 25th. That's why they were asked to gather additional information. So it would be inaccurate to say that the information provided on July 25th came out of nowhere. That would be inaccurate and is not the truth.
Very much. And so the green light referred to the department's plan in the process and not on the purchase of the property.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, the information conveyed to me was that the head of mission was giving the green light for the plan of the plan. He was not green lighting the plan.
Okay, thank you. And recent media reports indicate that senior officials were not informed of this purchase. Is this a gap? Is there a way to address this? Should they have been informed?
Mr. Chair, certainly it's always in the department's best interest to have as much of key information conveyed to the deputy's office as possible. With the scope of the department and the areas and issues that we navigate, it's not always possible. As stated in that article, the department has certainly taken steps, including the request from the associate's office to property branch to ensure that key real estate transactions are brought to the associate's attention.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Cousineau, while you're here with us as well, the media also often calls the new location for the official residence Billionaires Row. Why didn't you bring this nickname to your management's attention?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I know like this branding that's been actually done by that market and kind of raised like some question, but I want to reiterate that when the purchase was done and we've investigated like 21 property, when that one came out, it was actually in the district of Midtown in a very old heritage building that was built in the 50s. I think that the branding is done because of some surrounding high skyscraper that are very nearby. So it's in the same area, but it's not within the same building, which is why I suspect that there was not a lot of attention paid to it until it was raised up. I think, could we have paid a little bit more attention to that branding? Maybe, but frankly, what I think that the investment that we're doing, the purchase was done in this old heritage building, was the right one to do, and it's going to be benefiting the taxpayer.
Oh no, he had to walk a little bit more. Oh no.
And on that, you mentioned in your last appearance that ongoing savings from this transaction, including how leaving the co-op model in New York could lead to tax savings under the Vienna Convention. Can you explain that a bit further?
Absolutely. I've been talking about this annual ongoing saving that we're going to be doing. First of all, this is related to the fact that the residents who are moving in is a little bit smaller. So the costs of operation are a little bit smaller as well. But also to your point, the tax, according to the convention that you mentioned, is not it's not excluded in a co-op environment, which we are in right now. But in a condo environment, we are excluded. So that's going to be a big saving for the Canadian taxpayer moving forward.
I've got about 15 seconds left, so not much time for a question. But
Big
again, I think
savings.
this is a very high-pressure environment, and I really appreciate your testimony and for the clarifications. I mean, it's very important that we understand exactly what happened here. So I very much appreciate you being here. Thank you.
He needed a $6,000 coffee maker, guys.
Mrs. Vignola, please.
And virtual golf.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put forward the motion that I tabled in committee on Tuesday, October 1st, 2024, regarding the Governor General.
This interpreter's
and what was
quiet.
requested of the committee, that the committee take stock of the fact that the Governor General cannot speak well to Francophones in Quebec and elsewhere in provinces in their mother tongue, that it express its deep disappointment that after 3 years since her appointment, the Governor General of Canada is unable to sustain a basic level of conversation in French in the exercise of her title as representative of the sovereign in Canada, and that she has spoken only in English when French is the only official language in the province of Quebec, and requests the chair to report to the House as soon as possible. So this is simply a request to report to the House on the situation, a report on our disappointment. I hope it's not just me who is very disappointed in the face of such a situation. She is the representative of the King of England and consequently the head of state of Canada. The head of state speaks French. The representative is bilingual, but it's possible to be bilingual in many ways. Could have been with Spanish, Mandarin, Portuguese, could have been Danish, Swedish, but nevertheless, the two official languages of Canada are French and English.
The hell is she on about?
It's not one of the 3,000 or so languages or thousands of dialects around the world. So it's about respect for francophones in Quebec and the rest of Canada, regardless of whether they believe in or support this sign of the monarchy in Canada. They still need and have the right to be respected in their mother tongue. To see that language be considered as important. So I open debate for my colleagues to be able to express themselves and determine the issue around the vote to bring this report to the House of Commons. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I suggest we have an NDP, CPC, and LIB left. So if we proceed with those and then go back to debating that motion, would be much appreciated. So we can finish this round and dismiss our witnesses and then go to do. I do understand that the chair has already asked for extra time, so that shouldn't be an issue. Thank you.
Je n'y vois.
I don't see an issue as long as we come back to this after the round of questions.
Well, if you wish to withdraw for now, we can get back to it. We've got resources to about 1:30. I'm supposed to be in the House at 1:12 to finish a speech. I'm hoping we don't delay this much, but we can continue with the rounds if you're fine and get back to it after. We have yourself, Mr. Backrack, and then Conservative and Liberal round, and then we'll resume?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we fine with that, Mrs. Vignola? If committee is fine, we'll do that, and then I'll start a speaking a list when we finish up with the Liberal round. So we will, we've pretty much burned through your 2.5 minutes, so we'll zip over to Mr. Backrack, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to
business.
The topic of Mr. Clark and the process for approving the process. Mr. Clark asserted in his testimony that he was aware of the process, but, quote, I was not part of that process. Now, Mr. Cousineau has just said Mr. Clark was approving the process for proceeding. It seems like, to me, and maybe I'll pose this as a question to Ms. Nicholson, is approving a process, does that constitute being part of that process? Like if you're in charge of approving a process in your department, does that not make you a part of that process?
Mr. Chair, I'm hesitant to speak to any hypothetical situations. I can speak to what I approve and to refer specifically to the question in which I'm here today, which is specifically to speak to the 2 emails that I drafted. I drafted these emails, but other than that, in any reference to approval of a process related to property, I would need to refer you to my colleague, Mr. Cousineau.
To your understanding, did Mr. Clark approve the process based on the information that you've seen?
Based on the information that I have seen, my understanding is that the head of mission was aware and did not raise any concerns with the department moving forward to proceed with the sale and then purchase. Again, to clarify.
But not raising, did he approve the process? Did he approve the process? It's a very simple question. It's like a yes or a no. Did he approve the process?
Mr. Chair, no, the head of mission did not approve it was not in a place to approve the sale or purchase.
Why did Mr. Cousineau say that he approved the process?
Mr. Chair, I would need to refer you to my honorable colleague here who would be able to speak to his words.
Like it seems, Mr. Chair, like there's so much prevarication around Mr. Clark's actual role that it strikes the committee, and I think I can speak for some of my colleagues at least, that there's an attempt to construct a story that is, has any semblance of credibility when in actual fact, Mr. Clark was fairly involved in the process, wasn't just aware that a process was happening, but actually had some role in greenlighting the process, in fact, may have been instrumental in the process. And, it's frustrating for me because perhaps I differ a little bit from my conservative colleagues in the question of whether the purchase of that property was in Canada's best interest, whether it was a good decision. Really, this study has evolved into a study about the actual process and whether people are telling the truth about Mr. Clark's role. And that should be something that people are very concerned about if they're watching this, because we have a set of facts and assertions that is frankly unbelievable. It's unbelievable that a senior civil servant would write a memo and misuse phrases like giving a green light or has been instrumental. So we're in this strange situation where we have testimony that doesn't line up, and where we're forced to make conclusions based on inconsistent testimony provided by Mr. Clark and yourselves today. So I don't have any more questions other than to say it's really disappointing that we haven't been able to get to the bottom of what actually happened, and instead we're stuck making assumptions. So I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Bachrach. We'll now go to Mrs. Kusie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Nicholson, it just seems very obvious that the trigger was pulled on buying the $9 million condo immediately after the Prime Minister visited Mr. Clark in New York. It seems very obvious. And as well, it seems that Mr. Clark, as well as the department, put a lot of stock in the listing price. It's just not reasonable. It's not a good accounting practice at all, but unfortunately one that the government uses consistently to count on something before it is sold. It's just accounting is not done this way. Reconciling a budget is not done this way, and the government should not be conducting their business in this way as well. It's incredibly concerning that it seems that you've lied about changing this email, changing the terminology within the email. It just seems very clear that you're not being truthful with the committee today. We just don't know who directed you to speak these truths today to this committee and to Canadians. There have been multiple scandals where the minister said she wasn't informed about things. There's the $9 million purchase on Billionaires Row. There is the warship that docked in Havana alongside Russian ships. She said she didn't know about that. And in each of these instances, including the purchase of the $9 million condo on Billionaires Row, she said that she wasn't informed. Yet all of a sudden, something goes wrong in the media or then in this committee, and then she is informed. She's informed at this time. So what you're saying today doesn't add up. What the minister is saying doesn't add up. It doesn't. It shows competence or lying. One of the two things. And Canadians expect their minister to know what is going on, and they expect their minister, their government, and the government's officials, no matter at what level, not to lie. So we require more information, Mr. Chair, and with this information that we are not uncovering today, I wish we could say we are uncovering and not uncovering, I would like to move the following motion: that in regards to the committee's ongoing study of the purchase of the new official residence for the Consul General, New York, the committee invite former Chief of Staff to Minister Jolie, Peter Wilkinson, former Chief of Staff of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Minister Carolina Guy, and Property Branch ADM, Robin Dubois, and Director General of Policy and Planning, Frank, I'm not sure if that's Monsieur or Madame, as referred to by the witness here today. But it's clear we're not getting the answers. Certainly. It's clear we are not getting the answers that we require to, first of all, determine how the minister implicates herself into these significant decisions, and then as well the inconsistency that we've seen with the wording within the email and the timing around the email here today, Mr. Chair. And so as such, I'm putting this motion forward to call these further witnesses. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
We'll get the motion distributed. Are you sending it over to the clerk?
Yes.
Okay, do you wish to speak on it, or I'll start a speaking list on this motion?
Sure, you can start a speaking list. Thank you.
Are we getting hard copies of this?
Would anyone like to speak on it, or would you like to wait a few moments? We'll suspend for a couple moments and wait for it to come up. We'll just suspend for a couple moments.
Okay, so just to recap there, she said that she wrote the email. She said that she wrote that Condo Clark had the green light. He gave the green light. Everything's good. Go ahead with the purchase. We know from previous testimony that Tom Clark viewed the property with realtors, and when he was asked by MP Brock, he said, "Oh, I just walked around. I didn't say anything. I didn't make any decisions. I just was shown the property." And MP Brock goes, "Sir, have you not purchased properties before? Like for your own self? Then you know how realtors are. They try to sell you on the property." He goes, "Oh, I wasn't upsold on anything." He definitely, what happened here was Condo Clark saw the old property, thought probably the bathtub wasn't big enough. "I like this property over here on Billionaires Row. Look at this nice virtual golf. I can somehow do business while I'm playing virtual golf." And then he went ahead and tried to get the Foreign Affairs to purchase the property. That's basically what happened. And they're trying to cover it up because Tom Clark, when asked in committee last time, said that, "Oh, I only had verbal conversations with people." There's a written email here in testimony today showing that there was correspondence between him and the department agency that's making the purchase. So he can try and say all he wants that, "Oh, I never had any involvement, and anything that I corresponded with was verbally, so I don't have any evidence of that." And then she can try and say, "Oh, I greenlit the project, and it was all good, but I misspoke there." I mean, it's just not believable. It's like the Randy and the other Randy. Like, it's just not a good lie. It's not believable. Let me read some chats here. So pissed that Trudeau took off to France. Yeah, I don't understand why he's jet-setting over to France. He just saw the Prime Minister of France just the other week for like 4 days. Don't understand why he needs to see him again. Is perjury a crime in Canada, or is it common policy? It's pretty common with liberal insiders, I guess. How do these corrupt liberals sleep at night? On a bed of money? And trying to say they needed more room when it's actually smaller. Yeah, like they tried to say it was smaller when the new property's maybe 100 square feet smaller. Like, it's not. And it's more luxury. It's in a building that's known as Billionaires Row. So it's just ridiculous. It's like, if you're going to come up with a lie at least try and make the lie believable. They don't even try to do work on the lie. They're just like, no, we're going to go with this. And it's a really bad lie. It's just not believable. So just while we're waiting here, they're passing through the motion, which I agree with, MP Kusie's motion. Let's see if there's anything else that we're missing while we're waiting. We can go ahead and tune into the House for a sec. See what the House is up to.
And on this issue, obviously, it wasn't a priority at the table, at the negotiating table for the NDP. And so we just have to take that context into consideration as Canadians are listening to this debate.
This is ready.
Now, one thing I like to focus on is outcomes. And, you know, we talk a lot about dollar amounts and big dollar amounts for some programs. I think, you know, the Liberal defense
so as soon as the
today has been to talk about how much money the program costs. That's been Liberal defense. But, you know, I think we've got to take a look at outcomes. And when we take a look at outcomes, when I think about the outcomes that I want for my son is now 28. He was 10 when I was first elected. He turns 29 in November. When I think about outcomes that I want for my son and Canadians like my son, people around the world like my son, Jaden, I want,
okay,
you know,
back.
we want them young kids. Jaden was diagnosed in 19.
Deal with the Mrs. Vignola's motion after we proceed. Is that the process?
It was going to be the agreement was Mrs. Vignola's after the two interventions from the Conservatives and the Liberals.
And it got
so
quieter.
After, hopefully put this motion to bed, we're going to then finish the interventions from the CPC and yourself. Then we'll get to Mrs. Vignola's motion.
And I understand the minister is actually coming on the 5th of November. Is that not correct?
That's correct. Are you putting yourself on for the speaking
list?
Anyone want to speak on Mrs. Kusie's motion? We'll go straight to a vote then. We'll go to a vote. Sir?
So the question is on Ms. Kusie's motion.
I can't make this any louder.
La motion de Madame Kusie.
The vote is on Ms. Kusie's motion.
I had my hand raised to discuss on it.
Like, it's really quiet, and I can't make it any louder.
We started the vote. Oh, I apologize. I apologize. Mr. Brock is correct. Yes.
Now you can put your hand up.
I
Mr.
accept
Brock's
full
in the house.
responsibilities. That's my mistake. I apologize. On the we had speaking list for Mrs. Kusie's motion. I'd recognize Mr. Souza. You finished this time. Mr. Brock, you are correct. You had your hand up. I apologize. We're not voting on it yet. You're up on Mrs. Kusie's motion.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize that I arrived literally at the tail end of this particular important meeting, but I am familiar with the evidence from Ms. Nicholson. Thank you for your attendance. I just want to reiterate the extreme importance regarding the content of my colleague Ms. Kusie's motion. This saga seems to create different layers of complexity, finger pointing, denials, mistruths, exaggerations of the truth. It's hard for this committee to determine who is telling the truth, and I understand the evidence we've heard today from Ms. Nicholson is she wants to assign herself full responsibility for attributing input directly from Mr. Clark in the acquisition of this $9 million condominium on Billionaires Row. I find that really hard to believe, given the explicit language used. This wasn't a typo scenario. It was very, very specific that Mr. Clark did have his hands all over the acquisition of this particular unit. And the evidence that we have heard so far in this particular committee seems to lead credence to his involvement. I remark and recall just how ridiculous Mr. Clark statement was to the effect that when he was invited for the first time to tour this condominium with a real estate agent, he had the audacity to challenge me and suggest to this committee that he walked in with the real estate agent who listed it and sold it to the government of Canada, and not a word was spoken. The two of them walked around aimlessly, not pointing out features, not communicating with each other, simply observing. That is absolutely ridiculous in the extreme. For someone to tour a property and not being guided by an agent, it only leads credence to the fact that Mr. Clark had previous knowledge about this unit, had input with respect to the acquisition of this unit. So we need to hear from further individuals to shed truth on what really transpired. I understand that the minister is about to appear to answer to these questions. I read recently in the press that her office is denying that they were even made aware that this condominium was located on Billionaires Row. Again, I find that extremely hard to believe. The minister has a penchant for basically denying anything that seems to be controversial in her portfolio, which begs the question as to who really is telling the truth. So for all of those reasons, Mr. Chair, having more witnesses coming to this committee to shed more light on the process and the acquisition of this most extravagant condominium on Billionaires Row is something that Canadians want a clear answer on at a time when we have millions of Canadians lining up at food banks, at a time when we have millions of Canadians unable to make a down payment to purchase a home, when we have millions of Canadians defaulting on mortgages, when we have all kinds of people never even thinking about acquiring the Canadian dream of home ownership, and we have Justin Trudeau awarding a buddy of his from the media, Tom Clark, of a $9 million condominium at a time when we have a number of major crises in this country. Canadians are fed up. They want this committee to get to the truth, and that's exactly what we plan on doing. So I'll be supporting my colleague's motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we can go to Mrs. Atwin, and then we have Mr. Sousa.
Well, thank you very much. I first just want to mention that, with regards to process, that, I think it's taking advantage of Ms. Vignola's goodwill for us to have kind of stayed the conversation around her important motion as well. But we're here nonetheless. And so I also want to just comment on, again, the treatment of our public servants when they come before us in this very important committee. It's been a disturbing trend of what we've seen, kind of character assassinations, accusations that are, I think, deeply concerning and offensive to those who are, the subject of those accusations. And I'm very conscious of how previous public servants and their lives have been affected by such appearances at this committee. And it's unacceptable and I think unbecoming of us as parliamentarians. On the motion specifically, we do know again that the minister is coming November 5th to answer our questions. We know that the minister is absolutely accountable to their staff, and we certainly want to hear from anyone who can shed light on this conversation. I think Mr. Baines' microphone is open.
Mr. Baines, your mic might be on.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've already requested for additional information for electronic communications that may perhaps shed even more light on the conversation that we're having today, which I think is great. And I think that, again, that's what we're all trying to achieve here is to get to the bottom of what happened. I'll also take, issue with Mr. Brock's characterization saying that the Consul General had his hands all over this acquisition. I think we've heard repeatedly that that's actually not the case. And so I just think we need to be really careful about the words that we're using in this space. And if we actually do want to get down to the truth about what happened, I think making those assumptions and those generalizations are really unfair. And I don't think it leads to us in finding out what the truth is in this situation. And so I think we should all just be really careful and cautious. Again, we want to hear from those that have information pertinent to this discussion, absolutely. But I think what is the proper channel, what's the proper process is really what we need to discuss here. So just with that, I have deep concerns about this, and I'd just like to register that.
Thanks, Mrs. Atwin. Mr. Sousa, please.
Thank you, Chair. And to further Mrs. Atwin's comments, we want truth, we want transparency, we want to make sure that we protect the interests of Canadians and taxpayers with all decisions that are being made by government and its officials. And through testimony that we've had on this particular file, it's been evident that much has been taken to try to assure and enable us to have a net benefit. And it's not happening just now with this new Consul General. It's been ongoing for some time. And in order to establish truth and transparency, in order to respect the tremendous amount of work that our civil servants do, I think the tone and the line of questioning also deserves to be respectful and truthful, instead of making assumptions of guilt, making assumptions of wrongdoing, and frankly accusing civil servants of lying and being just misrepresenting who they are and what they do. So the line of questioning is also critical and important and needs to be justified too. And I think that in itself should be made with degree of a semblance of truth and in proper information. To jump to conclusions and act as some form of a kangaroo court is inappropriate and is not respectful to the citizens of this country, and when they deserve better from their representatives as well in that case, especially those that profess to be experts and professionals and experienced individuals of law. And they act according and they act in this way, and they interfere with investigations of other cases for political purposes, so they can put a tweet or a post is also inappropriate and self-serving on their part at the expense of others, including very strong, working, and credible members of civil service. In regards to some of what has happened here and the discussions around the decisions, how it came to be that this purchase was made and who was involved and what engagements others may have played or not, ultimately the decision rests with a process. A decision was never made by the Minister of the Crown, and the decision was not made by a head of state who's only there temporarily. I mean, there's no net benefit to the individual in question that are who accusations are being made of. It's certainly appropriate for that person to be involved and to be aware of the process and to be aware of what's going to take place, because they're the head of the mission. They're engaged in that local community. And the notion of it being in some row in some residence relative to the others that are in question, there are other consul generals and other diplomatic engagements within that region at a much higher price. Like, this is inconsequential in comparison to the rest. So I think that was brought out. And if I'm not mistaken, Chair, there was 21 properties that were investigated, that were addressed, that were reviewed. So the suggestion, again, accusing and deliberating guilt and ensuring that there was wrongdoing because, 21 properties were reviewed and an assessment was made that this was probably the most appropriate because it provided greater savings to the taxpayers and Canadians. That, to me, seems appropriate. It seems appropriate that we would take every avenue to bring forward to make the best decisions. And of course, it would make sense we would use those that are there in the specific community involved and in that area. And it should be appropriate, because the members opposite will then accuse them, well, you made decisions without information? Now you're making decisions without being informed. Like, you can't speak from both sides of your mouth. You've got to get and deliberate. Now, in terms of, was there a green light by someone? Does it matter? Did it even matter that an email was sent representing or possibly using an inappropriate means by which to suggest, yes, the Consul General was made aware that this was going forward and he approves, agrees, green lights? It doesn't matter, because it's his assumption, his direction doesn't provide the decision. The fact that that he is engaged doesn't mean he was the one making the decision. The fact that he may be walking the streets and going to other diplomatic residences doesn't mean he's made a decision or has the ultimate right to make the decision of the purchase. That has been clarified ad nauseum in these committees. It's been made clear that the Consul General did not make the decision. It's been made clear that the minister did not make the decision. It's made clear that proper processes were taking place, and it's made clear that it's been ongoing for over 10 years. This didn't happen just yesterday. So the accusations made by the opposition and the way they behave themselves and the way they're accusing members of the civil servants, I believe is totally inappropriate, and they should show more respect, Mr. Chair. The minister is making her way here on November 5th to illustrate and to respond to the questions before us. I think that's appropriate in itself. I would leave it at that, and I would show more respect to the people that are witnesses before us. Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to go to Mr. Kuzmierczak and then Mrs. Atwin. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been following the sort of the line of discussion or that our Conservative colleagues are bringing forward, and it's obvious to everyone here that they're trying to distract from what is the point and the unassailable fact, which is that with this purchase of this property in New York, Canadians are saving $4 million with this transaction. $4 million Canadians are saving with this transaction. And in fact, with this new property, they will be saving a total of $7 million over a 20-year life cycle. That's what's important here. Canadians will be saving, because it costs half the cost to operate this new mission. Canadians will be saving $115,000 annually in annual operating costs. So again, over the course of a 20-year life cycle of this property, Canadians are saving $7 million. This new property has a smaller footprint. It is also more accessible than the old property, and it also has many more functions as well. And so it's a better property in every single sense. It is a cheaper property to operate, and it will save Canadians $7 million. And so all of the discussions here, led by the Conservatives, are to try to distract Canadians from that very fact, which is that because of this transaction, real estate transaction, Canadians are saving $7 million. This is the way an efficient when you're looking at efficiency from government officials and government, this demonstrates that. This saves Canadians. I can't say that enough. This saves Canadians $7 million in a 20-year life cycle. What concerns me also about this motion is asking the Chief of Staff to appear at committee. This sets a dangerous precedent. We already have the minister appearing before this committee. And the minister speaks on behalf of the minister and speaks on behalf of the ministry. And so asking staff to come here sets a very dangerous precedent. As a member of parliament, as an MP, we all have staff. And I do believe that we would be quite concerned if any one of our staff would be called in front of committee to speak on our behalf and answer questions on our behalf. We are answerable. We are the ones that are responsible, just as the minister is the one who is responsible to speak for herself and for her ministry or his ministry. And so at the very least, very least, I would put forward an amendment to strike from the motion the invitation for the former Chief of Staff to Minister Jolie, Peter Wilkinson, from this motion. And so that is the sub-amendment, or excuse me, the amendment that I would like to bring forward. Again, this is a dangerous precedent.
Sorry, can I interrupt for a second, Mr.
Minister will be here.
Sorry,
Yes.
if I can interrupt. Just to confirm, it's just deleting the former Chief of Staff. Is that correct for your amendment?
That is correct, yes.
Right. Go ahead and continue, sir. And then we'll start speaking less on the amendment.
And
And the third point I just wanted to bring, I was listening attentively to the comments by my colleague, conservative colleague, Mr.
Sorry,
Brock,
I have to cut you off, sir. We're now actually debating your amendment, so I'll get
sure.
you to address your amendment.
Nope, that's fine.
So on Mr.
Nope, I'm all set.
Great. So on Mr. Kuzmierczuk's amendment, which is, as I mentioned, deleting the former chief of staff from the amendment. Someone wish to speak on Mrs. Kusie.
That is a ridiculous amendment because in eliminating the former chief of staff, Mr. Wilkinson, he's the one who is named in the email. The point of this motion is to determine who directed the poor witness who is still sitting in front of us here today, Ms. Nicholson, to use the terminology green light to provide the correctional email. Where did that come from? This motion is moot without Mr. Wilkinson, so we cannot support this amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Before I continue, there's two chiefs, sorry, my apologies, Mr. Kuzmierczuk, there's two chiefs of staff. Is it Mr. Wilkinson or former chiefs of staff? Which one?
I thought he said former. He made it very clear former.
There are two former. But we have two former. Which one are you eliminating, Mr. Kuzmierczuk?
Okay, I thought there was just
My apologies. I see one here. My apologies. I'm only reading one here, and that's Peter Wilkinson.
Two according to our clerk. Mrs. Atwin on the amendment.
So again, it just speaking to the precedent that we've said that we don't call chiefs of staff. Again, we know the ministers are accountable to their staff. The minister is coming. She will answer the questions that we need. But what we have again is we've the other two people who are listed. I think it is important to hear from them. We've heard testimony today that speaks to their potential additional information that could inform the conversation that occurred that led to the second email. And so we're very much amenable to that. But again, the chief of staff to the minister, I don't think is going to enrich because she's going to be the one to speak on behalf and to represent her team. So based on that, I support the amendment for sure, and I wouldn't be supportive without that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Brock, on the amendment.
Chair, and to my colleague, Ms. Atwin, I don't know what parliamentary precedent she is referring to, but chief of staffs are not immune. Current chief of staffs, former chiefs of staffs are not immune from attending at committee. Case in point, we had Katie Telford, the Prime Minister's chief of staff, attend not too long ago for a 2-hour meeting. Doesn't get much higher than Katie Telford. So again, I challenge Ms. Atwin to provide some evidence of some parliamentary precedent that has been set that the Conservatives are no longer following.
Yeah. Good point.
Mr. Sousa, on the amendment?
Yeah, if I recall, Chief of Staff Katie Telford, that was an exception. She actually offered to come forward. It wasn't a norm by which to proceed because she obviously wanted to provide some clarity. But in this case, we do have the minister herself who's attending before us, and to provide clarity and clarification and full understanding of what has taken place. And the requirement here is to enable us to determine if proper processes were followed, if the procedures were done correctly, if there was any interference by any other party by which to proceed to do so, which have restrictions based on the way we process the transaction and the decision-making of the acquisition. And I think that's been clarified at some length today and throughout the previous testimonies. Question now becomes, we want to continue to prolong this process, to continue to promote some notion that there was a benefit to any individual as a result of this transaction, because that's the only incentive that would be made or be insinuated by the opposition. And if that person or any of them were not involved in the process into the termination of the ultimate decision, then it would seem that that was not likely. But fine, there is the right, and we and as members of this committee, it's appropriate for us to have full disclosure as to how things proceeded. And the minister herself is accountable to the actions of her staff and ultimately has those rights. And certainly the opposition makes that clear almost every time when they make wild accusations about various ministers and prime ministers in terms of engagement on files that they have no decision-making authority on ever. And yet those allegations and those connections are continuously being made, as they are trying to do again today. And that's appropriate because we have a right to determine how best to proceed and how best to clarify the process. So I would suggest that given the fact that the minister is attending and that there is going to be the opportunity to provide and question her effectively on this thing, that we proceed with the amendment to eliminate Mr. Wilkinson from and others that are just going to eat up some time on our committee and prolong the matter when we want to get down to the conclusion of the issue, which was ultimately a huge savings to taxpayers in the decisions that was ultimately made. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Great. Mr. Backrack?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think we've heard points on both sides about whether the Chief of Staff should be either invited or not invited, and the best way to determine that would be to vote on it. My only point was that in her testimony, Ms. Nicholson did provide the last name for the individual whose first name is Frank, and I would just hope that the clerk or the chair could pull up that surname and add it to the motion. And I think the committee would agree to just have that done after the fact. I think we all understand who's being referred to, but it does seem funny to me to only have the first name there. That's already been dealt with? Maybe I missed that. Or are you just agreeing, Mrs. Block?
We're just kind of working on that right now.
You're working on it right now. Thank you very much. But just to restate my interest in voting on the amendment, voting on the motion as amended or not amended, and then moving on to Mrs. Vignola's motion, because I do agree with Ms. Atwin that it's somewhat in poor faith to jump ahead of our initial decision to finish the rounds of questioning and then move on to her motion. Okay, let's do it.
Amendment? We're clear on the amendment, which is eliminating Mr. Peter Wilkinson from Mrs. Kusie's amendment, our motion.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, Madame Atwin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Baines?
Yes.
Mr. Johari?
Yes.
Mr. Kusmirchak?
Yes.
Mr. Souza?
Yes.
Ms. Block?
No.
Mr. Brock?
No.
Ms. Kusie?
Opposed.
Madame Vignola?
Pour.
Mr. Backrack? Okay, so yeas 6, and nays contre, 4, 4.
So the amendment carries. So we're back to the original, amended motion, which has deleted Peter Wilkinson. I'll start a speaking list on that, please. Or are we ready to move ahead? We're ready to move ahead? So on the amended motion, we'll just say that is accepted unanimously. Wonderful. No, I'm sorry? Okay, we'll start a speaking list on the amended motion.
No, there's no point. It's fine. It will.
So we'll say on division then?
On division, thank you, yes.
The amended motion, as put forward by Mrs. Kusie, deleting Mr. Wilkinson, which is amended, is passed. We finished up with Mr. Souza. We're now back to our original final rounds, which is Mrs. Kusie for 5 minutes, then Mr. Jouari.
Mr. Kusie, because she moved her motion, and then that
right.
leaves
Mr.
me,
Jouari for 5 minutes.
Me as the last one, yes.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Jouari.
Thank you.
We have resources to 1:30, so hopefully we'll be able to get to Mrs. Vignola's.
Yes, and I'll be very short. Yeah, the last 5 minutes. Okay, so thank you very much. Madam Nicholson, your words and your explanation was interpreted and portrayed as lies. And you're disrespected. And I'm giving you the rest of the 4.5 minutes not to talk to us, but to talk to Canadians, because it seems when you talk to us, we have certain ways of interpreting. And I'm going to give you this opportunity to talk to the Canadian directly and once again explain whether by green light you meant that there's no impact on the work that the head of the mission is doing on his work and on his personal life, and he did not have any involvement in the decision making or the approval. Madam, the floor is yours. You can take up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will take the opportunity just to clarify a couple of things to ensure that there's no further miscommunications from my end. First of all, in speaking to something that one of the honorable members had mentioned, that this was a memo, just to clarify that the email sent on June 17th was not a memo. It was simply a transitory email meant as an initial first step summarizing the best available information that I had at my disposal in response to a question from the minister's office, which was focused specifically and primarily on the sale of that property. We were not looking at purchase, we were looking solely at sale. And so I think if my words drafted are read within that context, they are more easily explained. Again, the term green light was there simply to indicate that the head of mission was aware that a process was undergoing, as is our usual departmental practice. Nothing out of order there with our standard departmental practice. It is well within the realm of the normal that a head of mission would be informed that an ongoing real estate process was in play that predated their arrival and would likely impact them physically, that they would be required to physically move. And the clarification was made. There should have been a distinction in that first sentence that differentiated or drew a clearer delineation between the role of the head of mission, which was an awareness that a process was ongoing, and the work of the mission staff, which had been instrumental throughout this multi-year process, again, which was initiated in 2014, predating the current Consul General's arrival by 8 years. I'll also just state, just for clarification of timelines, that I think it's important to note that the head of mission was first taken to the property that was selected in April 26th of 2024. The purchase, the offer from the department to purchase was accepted on April 19th, predating his even seeing that property. I reference that because those site visits were taking place in April. My email was drafted in June of 2024 and July of 2024, long after the process and transaction had completed or had been initiated. Apologies. So just to clarify, the issue is actually far more simple than it might seem. There was an initial email that was drafted based on the information available at that time. There was, in an effort to summarize a very complex and vast process that spanned over 10 years, there was one line of a full-page email that was drafted in a way that, when taken out of context and applied to a purchase as opposed to a sale, could be misconstrued. But I would like to state again, for the record, happy to do so under oath, no one asked me to change any information. I received further information pursuant to that original email drafted on June 17th, relayed that information to the best of my ability to ensure that both my bosses and the office of the minister had the best available information. So again, just to clarify, everything to the best of my knowledge and the best of my understanding, as has been demonstrated and consistent through all testimony that has come before this committee. Just to clarify and reiterate, the head of mission was aware that a process was ongoing and was not in any way instrumental or in a position to take a decision, an actual decision, choosing a property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joiri. Witnesses, thank you for being with us. Thanks for your patience as we work through the earlier motions. You are dismissed. We're now restarting Mrs. Vignola's motion. I'll start speaking us. I see Mr. Backrack, and then Mr. Berthold, and then Mr. Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On this motion proposed by my colleague, Ms. Vignola, I think there are 2 points I'd like to make. The first one is that we certainly have substantive comment on the substance of the motion and this attack on the Governor General based on her proficiency in French. However, I think the main point that I'd like to make is just that this is better placed at the Official Languages Committee. Looking at it, I don't see a very close tie-in to the mandate of this committee. And so based on that, and with all due respect to my colleague, I would move that we adjourn debate, and I would encourage her to make this motion at the appropriate place.
We will turn it over to our good friend, the clerk, and we'll have a quick vote on the motion to adjourn the debate.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, Madame Atwin.
Yes.
Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Johari.
Yes.
Mr. Kusmirchek.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Ms. Block.
No.
Mr. Brock.
No.
Ms. Kusie.
Against.
Madame Vignola. Mr. Backrack.
Yes.
So, yes pour 6, nays contre 4, 4.
So I'm sorry, 6 nays?
6 yeas.
6 yeas.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that we are, the motion is adjourned then. It's not a defeat. With that, unless there's anything else, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your patience today. Sincerely appreciated.
Oops, sorry, I was muted there. Okay, cool. So that was a pretty good and informative committee. I mean, she's not good at lying. We all saw that. So here's a link for question period. We're going to switch over to that in about 50 minutes. Trudeau will not be in the House today because he's flying over to France to visit his PM buddy again, which he just saw a few weeks ago. Apparently, he can't go a few weeks without seeing his best friend there. Libs are going to try and spin the message of how tyrannical conservatives are at the end. Yeah, that's pretty much what they do. So we're going to end here. Join us for question period. It's going to be really spicy today because we know the government's being basically... No new motions are being put forward, so it's kind of in a shutdown period until they deal with the corruption scandal. So here's the link one more time. We'll be there in 50 minutes. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I can't believe we had over 1,000 people watching today. I didn't expect that this morning. Usually the morning streams are a little bit less, but I'm seeing you guys really like the committees, so I'll try and cover more. I do check to see what every committee's doing throughout the week, and I just try to pick the ones that I think are going to be most relevant, because some committees they're just boring to watch. There's nothing going on. So I'll see you guys for question period, and thanks for tuning in. And also thank you to Savage for the gifted subs before I go, because I really appreciate that.